Hello everyone and welcome to Lesson 20 of Objective-C on the Mac. In this tutorial, I'm going to be showing you how we can use categories in Objective-C. So categories, in essence, in their simplest terms, are essentially a way for you to add methods to pre-existing classes that you don't necessarily have access to. So for example, let's say I would like to add a method to the NSString class, and I want to check to see if any string that I put in will have a file extension for a movie. So if I was to do this without categories, I would have to end up either having access to NSString, which I certainly don't want to touch NSString. That's an Apple already made class for me, so I certainly don't want to touch NSString. So the other option is then to subclass NSString. But then you have to go through the entire process of subclassing NSString, and that's certainly not a nice process. It sounds easy, but it actually is not as nice as it should be. So thankfully, Apple has added this amazing feature which is called categories. And categories, again, allow us to add methods to pre-existing classes such as NSString that we don't have access to, like NSString, and we would like to add methods to them just to make them, that much better. So there is a great way to do this, and again, it's called categories. So how does a category work? Well, basically, you just define it, and you define which class you want to create methods for, and then you can just basically assume that that category is almost built into the class that you're talking about. So we'll see how this works in a second. So we're going to be making a category for the NSString class, and again, it's going to be checking to see if it has a file extension for a movie. It's not exactly the greatest way to do this, but it'll get your my point across anyway of how this works. So essentially, just as a side note, you can also create categories in a multitude of different ways. They all follow the same way that I'll teach you, but in essence, you can put them in different files, and they don't always have to be in separate files like I'll make them in this tutorial. You can put them all in the same file. It doesn't really matter, but for this tutorial, I'm going to make my categories in two separate files. So basically, I'm just going to do add new file, and we're going to hit the Objective-C class. I know we're not creating a class, but there is no default for a category. So we can go ahead and hit that, and for categories, we generally want to create something that's going to be descriptive. So for example, we could just create something that's going to be, it will define what class we're going to be altering, but it will also define what we're talking about for our category. So for the most part, we're usually going to want to first start off by the class that we're going to modify for the name. So in this case, we're going to be basically modifying the NSString class, and ours is going to be dealing with movies. So a good way to label this would be with a dash like that, and basically any key that's going to represent that this is going to be a category. So you want your categories to be stand out compared to just classes. So here we have NSString and then movies. So we can kind of see that that's going to be a category. So we can go ahead and create this here. And essentially we just have what is an a normal class, and we don't really want this class declaration here, so we just want the @interface and @implementation, which we just created. So a category looks very similar to a class, however it doesn't have instance variables, it just adds methods into a pre-existing class. So for example, I want to be adding a category, or I want to add methods to the NSString class. So we start out by defining the class that we want to be altering, which will be NSString, and then we can define what different the category is rather that we are going to be creating. So in this case, we're going to be calling ours movies. So basically, we are going to be adding methods to the NSString class, and our category is just kind of going to be about movies. So now we just start to declare all the different methods that we would like to create. So we're only going to make one, and it's going to be called isAMovie. And basically, isAMovie is going to be returning a true or false value, which in Objective-C is known as bool. And I don't think I've covered this in these tutorials, but bool is extremely simple, nothing to it. If you've watched the C tutorials, surely you know what Boolean is, or Boolean variables. So basically, a bool is just a true or false value, and in Objective-C, if it's true, it's just deemed yes, and if it's false, it's just no. So if we wanted to return true, we return yes, and if we wanted to return false, we just return no. So that's how bool works in Objective-C. We generally don't use our Boolean values that we do in C. So we just say bool as our return type, and isAMovie will be the method that we want to create here. So that's all we want to do for this part of our category, and now we can head on over to the implementation of the category. So here we can see that our name is kind of not what we want it. We want it to be the exact same as our implementation, or sorry, our interface that we had before. So again, that's the class name and then kind of the category that we're talking about. So here is the proper setup that we would like. So now we just implement how this class works. So it's bool isAMovie, and now we're just going to implement how it works. So the nice thing about categories is that we have complete access to the class that we are trying to add these methods to. So, for example, since we are making a category of NSString, it realizes that we want to be adding methods to the NSString class. So we might want to use some methods that are also in the NSString class. So we'll see how this works in a second. So how is isAMovie going to work? Well, essentially, it's going to check to see if it's going to take a string, and then we're just going to call isAMovie. So if the string has a suffix of .mov, then it's going to be a QuickTime movie. So that's one example. So again, since we can kind of assume that we are just in the NSString class, so we can just say self, like we're calling a method inside the class. We can just say self has suffix, and then this just takes a NSString in parameters, and here we just have .mov, which is the QuickTime file extension. So essentially we just created a statement that will check to see if the string that we are calling this message or calling this method upon, if it has the suffix of .mov. We can also check for some other things as well. So we'll just say self has suffix, and we'll just check to see if it's an MP4. And while we're at it, we'll also see if it has the suffix of .flv, which would be flash. So those are a bunch of different things that we have here, and now we're going to move on to what we do if it's true. So essentially, if the string that we're passing in here, or we're going to be calling this method with, we'll have if that string has suffix .mov, if it has the suffix .mp4, or if it has the suffix .flv, then we're just going to return yes. So it's very simple, not too complicated, just some pretty simple things that we already know. So let's just run through this one more time for our category. We start out with our interface, and our interface just is where we declare the methods that we want to create. So it's very similar to the Objective-C class. However, we don't have any instance variables, and we just name the class that we want to add a category for, or have different methods for, and then we just kind of define this category name in parentheses, and then we just do the same thing with our implementation, and then we just implement all the methods that we had in our interface in the previous section. So here our method isAMovie is just going to return a bool value, which will be yes or no depending on if it is a movie. So if it is a movie, our string will have a suffix of .mov or mp4 or .mlv or FLV. So that's essentially what isAMovie will do. It's just going to check to see if it has one of those suffixes. So now let's head over to our lesson 20 here, and we're going to import our header file that we had, and we're just going to say we're going to import our in a string movies.h. So now we also have access to these categories that we just added to our NS string, or our we just want to add to our NS string class. So now we can go ahead and create an NS string, and we're going to just call it str, and it's just going to get string literal, and we're just going to call this john.mov. So here we go, we just created a little string here, and now we're going to see if it is a movie. So what we can do is, since we created a category, that is basically implying that the category has full access to our string class, and now we can kind of assume that that category is built into the NS string class. It's not really, but we basically see it as that. So since our isAMovie is technically now just part of a method of the NS string class, we could just take str and call isAMovie. So even though str is an NS string, isAMovie is a category for our NS string class, so it recognizes isAMovie as a method to work with NS strings. So now isAMovie will do whatever we declared it to do before, and now we can just create whatever we want in these statements. So we're just going to do an NS log, and we're going to say yes, this is a movie. And that's all we're going to do. So now we can test this out. So we have john.mov, see if this works, and yes, this is a movie. Let's check our mp4 and build and run that. Yes, this is a movie, and we'll check our FLV here. And as we can see, yes, this is a movie as well. So if we change this around and make it like a pages extension, then let's do something more familiar, maybe .doc for Word documents, or I don't know, MP3 like a music file. Then any other extension, we can build and run this, and we can see that nothing happens because the end of this string essentially doesn't have the little format that we're looking for. It doesn't have .mov, doesn't have our two other ones that we have as well. So basically, this was just our introduction to categories, and just to summarize this all up once more, a category is just a great way for you to add methods to pre-existing classes that we don't necessarily have access to, and then once we declare what class we want to be adding these methods to, we are free to use methods with those classes. So since even though str is still an NS string, our category is basically adding this isAMovie to the NS string class, and so now when we call isAMovie, we wouldn't know the difference if it was from a category or if it's from our NS string class. So that's the beauty of how categories work in Objective-C. Just a great way to add methods to pre-existing classes, and we can see how powerful this could actually become if we wanted to work with any of the other classes in Objective-C as well. So anyway, this was your quick tutorial on categories. And just again as a side note, your categories do not have to be in separate files like I did in this tutorial. They could all be even in this int main here. And all we do is put the interface in with the same category name and the implementation in. We could just put it in main as well, just like up here. And it would work the exact same way. So that's just a side note. We don't have to have separate files for our categories, but I just did it for this tutorial. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed the categories tutorial of the Objective-C tutorials, and if you have any questions on them, please feel free to leave them in the comments or send me a message, and please subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you next tutorial.